Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our fireside chat, cross-border access to rare disease clinical trials, a patient-centric approach to feasibility and execution. Just a quick note that the fireside chat will be recorded today, and we'll be sending out the link a couple of days after the event to our participants and our attendees. All of the participants are muted, but we do highly invite you to engage through questions through the question panel that you'll see in the app, and we'll have a dedicated slot at the end to take them. We'll also be answering some of the questions you've submitted ahead of the webinar as part of the discussion today. And just to note that in case we will not be able to cover all of your questions today, we'll definitely follow up after the webinar. So before we jump into the exciting topic, let me do introductions. I'm Chris Rao, SVP of Clinical Operations from Alira Health, with a background in clinical trial design and management and a focus on rare disease clinical trial management globally. Begonya, could you introduce yourself for the attendees?
Great, thank you, Chris. This is Begonya Nafria. I'm working at St. John de Déu Children's Hospital as a head of patient engagement in research. That it's a department devoted to involve children, young people, and parents in clinical trials. And as well, at that time, I'm doing a research project. It's part of my PhD about the topic of this webinar, the cross-border access to pediatric clinical trials in Europe. In this topic specifically, I'm coordinating a working group in EMPRIMA, the European Networks of Pediatric Research of the European Medicines Agency. It's my pleasure to be today with all of you.
Thank you so much, Begonya. I know we're all excited about the topic, definitely impactful and very necessary. I think we thought maybe we could spend a few minutes just talking about why this really matters in the context of global rare disease clinical trials. I mean, I think that we know that for a sponsor or a CRO or even a vendor working on a rare disease trial, there's such difficult constraints. You have tiny patient populations, maybe a few specific clinical centers participating, but especially focusing on the patient, you have a very fragile patient population. Sometimes there's a delayed diagnosis, a high care burden, really limited treatment options for these children and adults. So Begonya, I was interested too in your thoughts on really why this matters so much, maybe what you've seen in your experience as well as you're working on these clinical trials, but also thinking about giving patients access across the board.
Yeah, I think that it's quite easy to explain why this topic is relevant and important for the patients' communities, and it's based in the real world in which clinical trials are happening, and basically specifically talking about rare diseases because it's not quite common that the same study will be open in all the European or around the world, because it's not feasible. And sometimes we don't have patients in these countries or, the expertise, it's challenging. And basically how these trials are organized is that they are set up in few specific countries. And on the other side, these patients, sometimes they don't have access to an approved treatment because sometimes it doesn't exist. And the only therapeutical option can be a clinical trial. Thinking in this situation, it's why it's important to think about the opportunities that the cross-border access can bring to these patients and the families that are behind. And at least in Europe, and I know that it's common around the world, it's not regulated. And it means that sometimes we need to analyze case by case, speaking about patients, but as well study by study, because the design, the disease, and many other aspects would be different. And in this sense, as sooner we foresee the need and the opportunity to involve international patients in a clinical trial, we need to have a thought about how to manage from the different perspective, not only, of course, from the patient experience side, as well from the regulatory perspective, the data, insurance, regulatory staff, etc. It's challenging, I know, but as well, it's a practice in some studies and in some sites. And I think that today, basically the goal of this activity is to explain that it can be done and speak a little bit about the experience that we have.
I totally agree. I think we think often about when we're designing a protocol, we're thinking about the adapting the endpoints, the schedule of assessments, the different pieces of the protocol to the patient, but maybe we're not always thinking about things like travel logistics, the financial burden. You think about travel on a personal level, it's something that can cause anxiety, even just to take a vacation outside of a trial, and to add the complexity of trial participation. So I think a lot about, how do we focus on enrollment and retention, but not seeing patients just as a commodity, thinking about how we can really support them. Even with things like language, I think we don't always think about, we think about maybe translating a consent form or translating materials, but I know we'll talk today about the importance of, if we think about the fact that Europe alone has maybe 24 or 25 official languages. So to think about how we can support these patients even in their native language, if they're traveling, if we're going cross-border, there's a lot more we can do in the design process, but also when we're implementing these clinical trials to really support these patients with logistics and even emotional and support throughout the course of the trial, if you agree.
Yeah, no, it's true. And what we need to do now before we finish the design of a clinical trial, think in the cross-border, plan or strategy of this specific trial. That I agree, it needs to contemplate, anything about travels and accommodation, but sometimes it's even beyond because some patients, some families, they need to move their residency to another country because it's not possible to commute again to the home. And the experience, I fully agree. In general, it's something that not only for studies in which we have international patients, sometimes it's not, something that we anticipate in advance what the patients and the families they will need. And in some studies that are long, we have a placebo arm. There are complex issues. The emotional support, as you said, Chris, it's so relevant. And when we discuss with families about some specific projects, they ask for this support, because the journey would be different if you have someone, supporting you, or you have even, peer support. There are many ways to help the family. And of course, the diversity, not only, of course, from the cultural point of view or country point of view, as well from language. And it's not only about translate the documentation of the study, have, a validated version of the PROs or PREMs. Sometimes it's as well to know which is the cultural diversity, depending where the country, their families come from. And usually the model that it works better, it's not only to have a professional translator, it's to have a cultural mediator, because you can communicate, more properly the information of the study and help the families that probably they land by first time in a country that they have never been before there. Everything is new, and they not only travel for the medical appointment, the ex-medical appointment of the study, or to some specific medical procedure. Sometimes, as I said, they move for some months to a new country, and you need help for everything, because at least in pediatrics, it's not only the patient, it's the whole family, and probably our siblings. You need to think about the school opportunities. It's complex. And I think that
Totally
as
agree.
sooner we have a strategy and a plan, the better. And it's, let's say, a team effort, because the sponsor can handle some, or anticipate some activities that are needed to accommodate these patients. But also you need to be sure that the site have the means and the expertise for making it possible the inclusion of international patients.
Absolutely. And to frame our conversation today too, I mean, we really see this as a global effort. So we're talking about within Europe, but I think also looking at North America. So we've worked on programs where we may have European patients coming to the United States. And so I think that we can apply the goal today, or even we can consider maybe APAC patients coming to Europe. So really the idea is to apply these principles and these guidelines truly to global trials, so that we can really focus on enrollment and retention of these patients, and really supporting them for the success of the trial. And I think that leads us into, we have a quick poll we wanted to put up. So we had a poll which was going to ask, in your view, what is the most complex challenge to address in cross-border clinical trials? So a rather broad question, a bit general, but we were interested in the audience, your opinion on some of the challenges that perhaps you're facing or that you anticipate facing in your upcoming programs. Then we can talk a bit about that. So we'll give everyone just a minute. It looks like we have a leader starting to show up, but I won't say it just yet, not to sway anybody. Okay, interesting. So it looks like around 40 to 42%, or just about 40% answered that regulatory and ethical approval differences across countries tend to be the most complex challenge. But that's followed up by 31% in access, equity, and reimbursement issues for international patients. And then interestingly, not far behind is logistics and coordination across sites and care pathways. So I think it's interesting. We see a decent split between three very important topics, but all topics that will we'll be talking about today. It's interesting that the first one kind of leads us right into, or we wanted to break this out into the phases of the trial, including the planning phase. So when we look at pre-trial, designing a protocol, planning things, one of the things that I think a lot about too is the capability of internally of a sponsor company or a vendor versus utilizing a specific qualified vendor to support cross-border travel, communication, visas. Begonya, I know you've had a lot of experience here too. Is there anything that you found particularly useful in-house versus utilizing a vendor for some of the trials you've worked on?
Yeah, it depends, of course, of the activity that you need to manage for international patients. In some cases, it works to have, an external vendor. But based on the analysis that we did in this project that I already commented, done within this working group in the European Medicines Agency, what we have seen is that at least in pediatric rare diseases in Europe, the sites that we have more experience incorporating international patients are the ones that we have kind of, let's say, department with the name international patient. It depends of the hospital, the name, it can be different, but it helps, to the colleagues working in clinical trials unit to manage visa, to manage accommodation, because sometimes you need to be in a residence or in a hotel, not in, in the hospital, anything that the families, they need to commute to our site for the trial. And they help a lot as well if it's needed with translations or cultural mediation with these families. I think that it's an asset from the site to have this on house because it can be, an emergency situation and there is no time sometimes to call, someone to come from an external company to the hospital. Have these facilities in the site, it helps a lot.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. From a logistical perspective, I think one of the things that speaks to me is the importance of the sponsor also maybe having a dedicated resource or someone assigned to also keep track of that process. And whether you're working only with the site patient department, or perhaps you have a vendor that you're working with, maybe it's a vendor under your CRO. But I think it's really important for the sponsor to have someone that is really thinking about this as one of their main assignments during the course of the study or during pre-trial and planning, because I think it's something that maybe is easy to lose track of, but one of the most essential pieces in these rare disease trials. And I've seen, especially when it comes to the planning phase from a financial perspective, to dedicate a portion of your trial budget to this type of activity right from the beginning, so you have it clearly budgeted. And I think that is an important piece early, so that you're not scrambling to try to implement this mid-trial, or perhaps if enrollment is struggling. To me, this is really an integral part of the trial planning and the protocol design process, rather than something that we add on later, because I think that's when we get into additional delays. We're not as effective because we're scrambling or rushing to implement it during the course of the trial.
Yeah, it's true. I think that you need to have a plan, and of course, budget. It's part of the plan, and also, the right vendors. If it's, something that you need to externalize or that the site cannot offer, from the perspective of the site, have the minimum, external vendors makes easy the life, of the people doing the logistics of the trial, and of course, work with internal, colleagues and departments as well makes more easy everything. Said this, something that I have seen, and I think that it's helping a lot to pilot initiatives and to move forward to this model that can anticipate any need from international patients, is that some sponsors, some pharma companies, they have now internally in the research and development departments or in the clinical research department, professionals dedicated only for the cross-border needs of the studies. And I think that if the sites are ready and the vendors are ready, it's wealthy probably this model to have a specific small department or professionals devoted to ensure that when you are designing a clinical trial, someone is taking care about the potential needs of incorporating international patients, and have the decisions on time, because the patients are waiting, and if we don't have a plan to accommodate international patients and it takes time, probably this patient, it can be not, eligible to participate in the study. I think that as much we can anticipate, the better for the quality, of course, of the trial, but of course, as well, the better for the patients that are waiting to participate in clinical research.
Yeah, to me, it speaks also to the design process when we're writing a protocol or choosing our assessments or endpoints, because one of the responses was that the logistics and coordination across the sites and care pathways is challenging. even in pediatric trials, you think we're almost doubling the logistics and coordination because you have the logistics and coordination with the child participant, but then also with the parents, the caregivers, the family members. And so I think a lot about when we're designing a protocol, how are we building in, say there's things like photography, who can take the pictures, say there's assessments that are done in the offsite, small pieces of the protocol design process, but that speak to logistics and coordination. And then it's even further complicated by the different cultural aspects of people participating in the trial. So I think that speaks to having an expert involved in this process who can speak to previous experience, what they've seen, whether it's pediatric or adults. But I think the expert component is really critical here.
And also something that it can be wealthy, it's to think, let's say, in intermediate solutions, because sometimes when we think in international patients, we think in someone, as I said, no, that can come from 2-3 hours of flight, that can come back home, but it's not always the case. And if you need to change your residence for a long time, it's challenging. And we have nowadays a study, studies that are so complex, sometimes so long. And also in these advanced therapies studies, the follow-up, it's really long. It can be, 10, 15 years. Probably there are intermediate solutions that there are activities that, of course, you need to do in the main site, let's say, but some activities of follow-up or regular checkups, probably they can be done in a satellite site that can be qualified and, oversee from, professionals of the main site. They can be, intermediate solutions to offer the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial to the patients. But in some cases, what they need to invest, it's a lot, and it's not only about time. Sometimes, the mother, at the end they need, the mothers, they need to resign of the opportunities to have a work, because a company is not going to be waiting for you 6 months if you travel, abroad or even more. I think that we need to think in the specifics of every trial and foresee if are intermediate sometimes solution that can make even more feasible the inclusion of these patients.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a challenge, it seems very large, but I think our takeaway today is that it is very doable, and it's maybe an integral part of these trials rather than something to consider, because especially in these rare, ultra-rare disease, these conditions, this is becoming a must. And it's also something I think that patients are willing to do in terms of accessing clinical trials in other countries. But maybe that rolls us into sort of during the trial, kind of that next phase when we're actually conducting the trial. One of the things for me is really important is again, the human factor. And it's a lot of details, but again, I think it's an attainable goal. So you think about things like helping people at the airport, getting patients settled in, having a local connection. You may have someone who's now flown, in the case of Europe to US, they've flown 8 hours. They're now in a completely different setting, completely different cultural setting. And one of the things we talked to about is, maybe an assigned case manager. Maybe there's someone, again, internal to the sponsor who is a go-to or using a vendor. But I think you've probably also experienced that too in some of your trials.
Yeah, this is something that the families, they value a lot, to have someone that you can contact, anytime that you need anything from, the study. Sometimes, it happens, an emergency, and you don't know, if you are not close to the site, how to do it, or which information the other, emergency department they need. Have this close human, because at the end it's, as you said, a human connection with a professional of the site. It's something that the families always they put in value, and have all the time the same person, because sometimes it depends of the project. If they are long, they need to have a new time to be, or to get adapted to a new professional. This is something that we have done a lot of activities with parents, and always they said that at the end, what is behind of a clinical trials unit or a hospital site, it's the professional team. And imagine that with a child in a foreign country participating for a long time in a clinical trial, the human support, it's something that it's the most valuable thing when you ask about the experience of the families. Of course, facilities, and there are many other things that they can say that they help, but the most preferred option is to have someone that can be anytime around you to help in anything that you might need.
Completely agree. For me, as an operations person, we think a lot about, as you're conducting the trial and setting it up, you think about things like translation of documents, materials, but it seems really more than just translation. There's really the cultural component. So we can, any translation company can do an excellent job in translating a consent form or patient materials to support them. But without the cultural piece, which really is another level of support, I don't know that we would have the same engagement in the trial. And I think that, very basically speaks to retention in the trial as well. How can we help these patients once we've enrolled them remain on the trial, especially where you may have a long-term follow-up phase or a follow-up phase that's very critical to the endpoints, where maybe we have patients that are just not able to stay not because of the logistics, but because of the support. So it sounds like we're on the same page in terms of that human factor, finding a way to support them, whether it's a case manager, whether it's at the site level, or whether it's someone doing a check-in with these patients while they're in the other country.
And something that it helps a lot that sometimes we don't put in value, it's the role to prepare these patients and these families to travel abroad from the hospital where they are treated. Because at the end, it needs to be a connection and a liaison with the medical team that is taking care of the patient before this patient goes abroad to participate in a clinical trial. The role as well that some patients organizations they play, because they are educating the communities of patients and caregivers about potential future opportunities. And sometimes even they know before us that it's coming, a new clinical trial. And I think that as much these patients and the families will be ready and prepared to participate in a clinical trial, even if it's in the same country where they live, it's so important, because at the end it's part of the adherence of the participation in the study, to know what means participate in a clinical trial, that it's still an experimental treatment, despite it can have a clinical benefit, your role, your responsibilities, your rights. I think that this human part, that it's not only from the site where the study is conducted, as well from the medical team that refers the patient and patients organizations, I think that it's something that we need to consider about the positive effect that it has in the patients.
Absolutely. It made me think too a bit about, I know this from a sponsor perspective, maybe it's a small biotech, or even within pharma, sometimes this can seem overwhelming or perhaps too much of an effort, and go back to the traditional adding as many countries as possible to the trial in order to be able to capture those few patients that exist in those countries with the disease. But it actually made me think that in a way, this is simplifying the process, because we can do country selection and site selection, choosing truly the countries and the sites that are most appropriate, and then we're able to support bringing those patients to us where possible. So in a way, we're almost simplifying things, even though at times I think this can seem like maybe an unreachable goal or a bit overwhelming from a logistics perspective. I actually think it's the reverse, allowing us to focus on the countries and the key opinion leaders and the sites that we really want to work with.
Of course, from the patient perspective, if you can have the chance to participate in a trial in your country, it's the most, let's say, easy way. But as you said, sometimes this is not possible for the expertise that you need from the medical experts, from the sites. And also, even if you open a clinical trial unit and you have few patients in the country, it doesn't mean that these patients will be at the end eligible, or that they want to participate. Sometimes we take for granted decisions, and based on the probability and what it's behind about to set up and conduct a clinical trial, it's not realistic thing that some studies will be conducted in in the majority of the countries. It's not possible. And knowing this, and the challenging that it can be as well the recruitment, we need to be open to these new ways to conduct clinical trials. There is no regulation, as I said, in Europe about cross-border access to clinical trials. It's for healthcare research, but probably it will come, because at the end, what we want is the quality, the expertise, and offer the best chance to the patients. And if it's not possible in the country where the patient is living, I think that it's part of the patient's rights or the human rights to make it possible and offer this opportunity, because at the end, it's the only chance sometimes that we have to treat the patients. But we need to work to refine the models and the opportunities, and as I said, have these plans in very early stages to foresee any need that we can have and make it possible, because sometimes there is no time to adjust when the patient is identified to participate in the recruitment of a clinical trial.
Yeah, and I see really there's a willingness and an interest. You think about especially pediatric trials, that the parents are looking for care, they're looking for other treatments. And so there is a willingness for to travel, but they need that additional support. It's generally not something that they can do by themselves. It's truly overwhelming for them. I know we were working on a project where we had patients and children in the US from a couple of European countries, and the sponsor did have a care manager who was not only doing translation, but even when it came to things like questionnaire completion, some of the questions could be a bit difficult to understand just culturally. And so there was really that extra level of support, which also speaks to the quality of the data that we're getting from these trials if we add in this additional component to be able to make sure that these patients are truly understanding the data that they're giving.
Yeah, we conducted a survey across Europe and we had around 1,500 answers. And when we asked the parents of children living with rare diseases if they were willing to travel to another country, if it means an opportunity for a treatment, the majority of them, of course, they said yes. And about the language thing, in this survey, at least, it's not a big sample because Europe it's 300 millions, but from the sample of this survey, at least 1 out of 2 of the parents that they participated, they said that they can communicate perfectly in English, because sometimes we think that we need to translate into other languages. And of course, the translation it's possible, but sometimes the challenge there is to have validated tools, PROs, PREMs, quality of life questionnaires, and these tools not always are validated in all the European official languages, or even from other official languages beyond Europe. And if we have at least the chance to explore the opportunity to use those tools in English, it can be as well another opportunity to participate to the patients and the families. And the point about the diversity, from the cultural point of view, it's relevant because when you translate a questionnaire in order to get the validation, it's not only about the language. You need to also assess the cultural adaptation of this questionnaire, because sometimes you can be very accurate in the translation, but it's not done in the proper manner, as you said, that the patients or the families, they can understand the questions, and of course they can report data with quality. There still, I think that we need to improve and see how we need to accommodate these opportunities in order to not exclude these patients that they cannot communicate in English, or that we don't have these tools validated into their mother tongue.
That's a great point. It reminds me, we worked on a project in an oral medicine indication where we were asking patients about their ability to eat. And we realized at a certain point that the food samples or the illustrations we were using were not appropriate for every country, because a food in the US that may be very easy to use as a visual aid may not be available in another country. So I think it speaks to your point. How are we being culturally sensitive, getting the data that we need, but understanding that it really is it's a data quality, especially with these subjective endpoints. It's a data quality issue. And I think it's important for sponsors to think about that. It is the human factor, but it's also a data factor of the success of the study if we're being culturally sensitive to these patients.
It's true. We had as well a project time ago in which we review and get some insights about the specific educational materials used in a clinical trial with, in this case, parents from Germany, Spain, and Japan. And the feedback was different in each of the countries in regards of, the artwork, because sometimes what suggests to you the artwork of a material can, make you more closer to you to understand the information, the amount of information, because in some countries, culturally, you want to know everything, but in other countries, you want to know only general information. I think that everything needs to be adapted, thinking in the cultural diversity that even, it's beyond the language diversity, and see how the experience of the patients can consider, these specific needs, because if not, probably we fail. And it's not only a matter to recruit the patients, it's a matter to ensure that these patients, can continue until the end of the study.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see there's a question that maybe we can, I know we're saving some for the end, but I think it's interesting. So I think we've talked a lot about the goals, but maybe very practically speaking, the question was how it's possible to fund or reimburse. So literally funding, reimbursing travel, accommodations, and caregiver costs. And we also want to avoid those undue inducement concerns. So I know you are living this on the site side, on the clinical site side. I don't know, Begonya, if you had some thoughts on that, how you've seen that, the actual reimbursement, the actual payments happening from a practical perspective.
In general, usually what the families they ask is that better if it's done by a professional vendor and they don't need to take care about anything, and as well about the anticipation of the cost, because for some families it can be a burden or probably a point to decide to not enroll if they need to pay everything in advance. I think that it's again a matter about consider the patient experience, and as easy we can make the life for the to the patient and to the families for participating in the clinical trial, the better. They are suffering the condition, they need to move to another country, and also if they need to take care about to organize everything and also anticipate the cost, sometimes it's a way of not accepting to participate in the trial. And I know that when you come probably for the screening visit, I know that some sponsors they can cover or not, but I'm not talking about this specific visit. I'm talking in general that the study can be long and they need to manage everything by themselves for months or years. I think that in this discussion that we had previously about vendors and how we can make better this experience, I think that we need to provide the right support that these families they need to ensure that they have everything that they need to travel and not to manage by themselves.
I was thinking the same. To me, it also speaks again to the importance of having an expert, having whether it's a vendor or someone internally working also in conjunction with the sites, but especially from a compliance and a legal perspective, having that expert will help you navigate through those potential complications, because it is an important point. You want to make sure that that reimbursement or that payment is happening according to the laws of the relevant nation, but also having that expertise will give you that confidence that you can make this program happen, but not be putting yourself into potentially a tricky situation from a compliance perspective. And I think that actually maybe jumps us into, I know we've talked a lot, so we'll give everyone a chance to participate again. We have a second poll for everyone. So the second poll is, what do you consider the most relevant benefit of including international patients in clinical trials? I think you can tell what we think, but we were interested in the audience's opinion here on benefits. And we'll give everyone just a half a minute or so to respond and see what our answers look like. Okay, so it seems like we have a front runner here in terms of responses, which I think is an interesting one. So it looks like what we have in the lead is increased diversity and representativeness of patients, which really speaks to me. It makes me happy that's a response, and followed by access to trials for patients with limited local options. I think that kind of is aligned with what we're thinking as well, especially when it comes to patients that wouldn't normally be able to participate in the trial because of it not being available in their country. But Begonya, I know that this too probably speaks to you, and it's something that you focus on quite a bit in your research and your day-to-day activities.
Yeah, it's true about these results that from, let's say, the scientific point of view, to ensure this diversity, I think that it's so important, and sometimes it's challenging, and some treatments they fail when it's an open access to this treatment, because at the end the community of patients that participated in this study didn't represent the whole community. I agree that this is a very relevant point from the scientific perspective, but as well from the patient and family perspective. And the second one is about the access. Yeah, I think that it's a reason to ensure that the studies will be conducted on time, that we can of course deliver these study results according to the plan, and hopefully if these treatments arrive to the market, benefit more patients. At the end, let's say it's a win-win approach, and in some specific conditions, probably it's the only chance. Be open to incorporate international patients. We have in our hospital studies in which we don't have patients from Spain. It's a reality, or studies in which we have patients from many different countries, and of course as well from Spain. But at the end, it's a reality about this point that we discussed, that some specific conditions in clinical research require a global approach, and about as well the expertise of the sites. We don't have experts in rare or ultra rare diseases in, depending of the condition in all the countries. Yeah, it's very, let's say, a reflect of the reality, I think, this data.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting too. I mean, we talk a lot about improved recruitment and faster enrollment, but I think we can see here from these responses, it's not the only thing that we are focusing on. Even thinking from a brainstorming perspective, you think about the fact that if you have increased diversity, then that may make that data applicable perhaps to the countries that these patients are coming from, even though we didn't have trial sites open. So you think about even when these sponsors are moving into looking at access to countries, looking at pricing and reimbursement, there's also a downstream effect there. I think if we have this increased diversity within the data set and the patient population, more of a an access question and a commercial question, but all things to consider as we're looking at cross-border access for these patients.
Yeah, as I said, I think that it's a win-win approach, but we need to have from the different stakeholders involved the right capabilities and the right plan. It's not something that we can deal from today to tomorrow to manage. We need to anticipate the things.
Absolutely. Which I think leads us into sort of the next phase of the discussion, which would be as we're ending the trial. So, if we've successfully instituted this type of a program, but what happens with continuity of care? What happens when the patients now, perhaps there's a 5-year long-term follow-up period, or perhaps there's an expanded access program or a named patient program that we can provide access to. I don't know if you've seen specifically any strategies, Begonya, in terms of maintaining connections with these patients, because if we're bringing them to us for the trial, it's our obligation, I think, to then continue to support them in the long-term follow-up phase or in the days and years to come.
Exactly. I think that it's our responsibility to continue offering the access to this treatment to the patients that they participate. And there are some pilot initiatives there. Something that I forgot to comment is that in Europe there is a collaborative project between FPA, the European Pharma Associations, and EFGCP, the European Forum of Good Clinical Practices, that it's working to provide some recommendations, not only to conduct these studies as well, in the follow-up and in the extended access to patients. There are some pilot initiatives that common sense says that the participants in a clinical trial, until they can have, of course, the access to this treatment in their countries, they need to be, covered in some way. The other point that still there are, different ways to solve, but there is no a standard or a guidance that we need to follow straightforward. It's the long follow-up that these studies they have. In our hospital, for example, we have patients from our country or our hospital that they travel abroad, and the follow-up is done in our hospital. It's an option, and I think that sometimes it's something that we need to foresee if it helps as well to the families, because imagine 15 years traveling once or twice or even more per year to another country. Sometimes as well it can be part of the decision, information that you need to take into account in the decision making process. And I think that have a plan that makes better this experience from the sponsor, from the regulatory, of course, agency that needs to approve this. It's something that probably makes more easy the life of everybody. Are different methods or models. Some of them are implemented or piloting, and I think that what we need is to share this evidence that these studies with international patients are feasible. The follow-up, it can be done in a specific approach and not all the time traveling abroad, etc. And share these lessons learned with the community, because at the end, the first ones that we did this international inclusion of patients, nobody probably teach us at that time about how to do it, and we have generated a lot of expertise that can benefit others to do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great experience. For me too, it's also speaks to the importance of close coordination with the original clinical center, because it's still in a site-based model, a site-based trial. That is still the coordinating center. The PI is there, and so to the question about continuity of care, it's really critical that there's close coordination with the original center, but then also now if, say, the patient has returned to their home country, I know we've worked with in situations where the sponsor has chosen to have a vendor that's able to do phone calls to the patient in their native language, whatever it takes to be able to maintain that contact, then also make sure that the site itself, is getting the medical records they need, is getting the data so that they're able to collect what's necessary for the protocol.
Yeah, we have chances with the digitalization and the centralization of clinical trials. And as I said, we need to find the right balance. Of course, when you ask the families, depending of the condition and which specific activities they prefer to come to the hospital, but there are sometimes other alternatives. And I think that this needs again to take to take into account the specifics of the study, the disease, because also in some cases, the patients probably they have some physical, limitations. I think that analyze study by study, thinking, what is behind from the patients and the families, it's the right approach, and involve them in these discussions, because we commented that it's good to have, when we design the protocol, the cross-border plan, and it's one of the recommendations of this initiative that I said that we have in Europe. But this plan needs to be done with the patients, because we need to know what they are willing to have, what they will accept, what it's possible. If we take again decisions granted for them, probably we have a lot of vendors and services and activities, but we are not covering specific needs that they can have. I think that patient involvement it's always needed, and we advocate to do it from the very beginning, but not only about the study design, about anything that can be related to the patient experience. And cross-border, it's a very sensitive experience, if I can use this word.
Yeah, no, completely agree. We had a question that was submitted, which was asking how we keep families engaged through the long-term follow-up once the active phase ends. And to my earlier point, for me, it's what can we do to connect with them directly? So whether it's phone calls, engaging them in other activities, I think that they are open to this, but we have to be the ones to provide it, to initiate it. It's the burdens on the sponsor and the supporting vendors to make this happen. And to me, it speaks also to the protocol design. If we know that we're going to have cross-border access to the trial and we have a long-term follow-up phase, how can we design that long-term follow-up phase to make it more accessible to the patients? Is there a decentralized component we can add? Does it have to be site-based during the follow-up period? All those questions that we're asking during the design phase, to me, directly impact our retention and the ability to engage through long-term follow-up with those parents and those families.
Yes, and this human support, that it's not only, let's say, from the medical professionals, as well from the colleagues working in mental health, because it's a long period, and the peer support, because in some cases what the patients or the caregivers are asking, it's the chance, the opportunity to share with peers, because probably you can talk with another member of your family or a friend about what is going on with your child or with yourself as a patient, but nobody will understand better you if it's not living the same experience. And sometimes this other piece to connect the patients with other patients living the same experience, not only the same disease, the same experience of the clinical trial. Sometimes we forgot about the benefits that it can have. And when you have discussions with patients, it's something that usually they ask for. I want to be involved and connected with a network of peers that we can use the same language.
Completely agree. I think that's really essential. Well, I know we could probably talk for another 2 hours on this exact same topic, but we have one last poll for everyone who's attending. And for us on our side, this is a very interesting question. So how patient-centric is your current cross-border trial model? And there's a number of different options here. Feel free to be honest. There's no wrong answer. And we know that everyone is at a different stage, perhaps in the implementation of this type of program, but we're interested in where everyone's at with these types of programs. And we'll give everyone a minute to respond. So it seems like we're very split between three responses, which are interesting to me. So it looks like at this point we have a very even split, somewhat across relying on sites to be handling the logistics, and then also those that just don't yet have a defined cross-border patient support model, which makes sense. And we hope that this discussion is helpful as you think about that and think about how to implement that I do think it's interesting. There's still a decent amount that have a dedicated case manager or point person on site, but Begonya, I don't know if this is kind of aligning with what you're seeing in day-to-day practice and what you're discovering as you're talking to people who are working on this.
Yes, it's what I commented previously about to have dedicated staff to help in any need that international patients and families they might have. And at the end, it's part of the expertise that you need to bring to make it possible, not only from the medical perspective as well about any other support that patients and families they will need. It's interesting the data of these the answers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, even to the response about we handle logistics ad hoc case by case, there's nothing wrong with that if we've set it up that way. I think as long as we are open to the option and are enabling this to happen, I do believe that there's different ways to do this, but it is definitely it can be a challenge, and it is, I think, a project worth considering for each of these rare disease trials.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, but if the plan is on place and you have the dedicated staff to make it possible, I think that it's not probably the most challenging thing that we cannot solve. Yeah, it's possible, and we have long experience on this. If I can comment, Chris, for the audience, we published, I think that was in January of this year, a manuscript sharing the experience that at St. John de Déu Children's Hospital we had at that time, managing 21 pediatric clinical trials with international patients coming not only from Europe, from 44 different countries, Asia, America. If they are interested, when you send the recording and the complementary information, probably it's a nice reading to know the model that we have, and so open to help any colleague from the audience to know more about how we manage at St. John de Déu.
Thank you for mentioning that. No, it's an excellent publication, and I think very relevant to a broad range of rare diseases, and for both adults and pediatrics. There's a lot of really excellent learnings that you can get from that. Well, I think we have just a couple of minutes for a couple of questions that were submitted by the audience that we didn't discuss yet. I think one of the interesting one was, if you could change one thing about how cross-border rare disease trials are run today, what would it be? What would be the one thing that we would change? I'll let you go first. It's probably a very complex question.
Let's dream. And probably my answer would be to have a regulation, something that can help, to standardize how to do it, to protect, the models that they work, to include the patient perspective. Because at the end, if we have, I think, at least my personal opinion, a regulation, probably it will help in the future to have more opportunities for cross-border access.
I completely agree. For me, from an very operational perspective, it would be that each of these trials would have, whether it's a vendor or someone within the sponsor company, that they would have someone focused on it to manage the logistics, to oversee the overall program, that it would be really a piece of each of these rare and ultra rare disease programs in pediatrics and adults. Because to me, there are very few trials where this does not apply. This is something that we can apply to just about all of these trials, and to provide access to the patient. So that would be a dream of mine, and hopefully maybe a reality down the road. So we have another, I think, an interesting question, and again, Begonya, I think speaks to your expertise. What does patient-centric look like operationally for a resource-limited site? So if you have a site, maybe it's a smaller center, a site that is maybe overworked or overburdened, what that looks like, how we're able to support with these cross-border trials.
Yeah, I think that it's a matter of collaborative work. As I said, for me, it's an asset, and it's part of the research that we did to have these external, departments helping clinical trials unit with anything that it's not medical. This accommodation, it helps a lot, because at the end it reduces, some internal burden in the clinical trials unit. Of course, have a department like the one that I'm leading, that it's listening the patients and the families. Because if you don't anticipate, as we have discussed today, the needs, and it's not only in general about the trial, it can be about the site, what you need in this specific site. You need to approach and listen the specific needs from the patients and the families, and have experts in the site managing patient involvement and patient engagement activities. I think that will help to provide the best experience to the participant in a clinical trial, because something that we need to take into account is that everything that you need to go through in a clinical trial, it's on top of your standard of care. It means more visits, in this case, travel, change your residence temporarily or for, some months. And it's a burden there, even if we try to do it, reducing, any, stress, suffering, whatever the adjectives, it's a burden there. And I think that as much we can work together with these communities and redefine the model about how we manage these studies at site level, the better. Probably for me, this would be the two recommendations.
I completely agree. Thinking about it from a logistical perspective, I think, as the sponsor, also we have the obligation, because often if you have a resource constrained site, a resource limited site, we as a sponsor generally have more resources, even if it's simply financially, than that site does. So for me, it's a question of how can we support that site? I think to your point, how can we support them financially, resource-wise? And to me, this applies to North America, to Europe, to the rest of the world. Can we provide study coordinator support? Can we provide additional nursing support? And can we be creative? There are often ways to give this additional support, but the financial burden will be on the sponsor with those resources. So how can we use a portion of our trial budget, our site budget, to be able to provide that for the sites that need it? And sometimes that can make a struggling site a fantastic site, a high enrolling site. They just need that additional resource support from the side of the sponsor.
Yeah, it's a good approach, I think, because not everything can be managed at site level. We need the help of the sponsors. You are right.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a fantastic discussion. We really appreciate the audience being here, the questions that were submitted. For me, in terms of takeaways, I'm coming away even more excited about these types of programs for rare and ultra rare disease, for adults and pediatrics, and really from the global perspective, regardless of the country where we're running these trials. I think it speaks to the fact that while it's complex from a logistical perspective, it's a very doable process. It's something that is possible to do successfully, and it really benefits patients, but also benefits the sponsors from a data collection, from a success of the trial perspective. I don't know, Begonya, if you have anything additionally, maybe even more from the site perspective on your side as a summary.
Yes, only to finish, I think that we need to make aware everybody that even if it helps only one patient, it deserves to be done, because probably for this patient, for this family, it's the only chance to access to a potential, treatment. And I think that even if it's challenging or complex, it's possible. And if it's for only one patient, I think that we need to move forward with this model and make possible these opportunities. If the trial cannot go to the country where the patient is living, we need to make possible that the patient can commute to another country, and also think even beyond the participation in the trial. I think that the national systems taking care about social needs, educational needs, they need to be sensitive with these realities. It's like if you are a refugee in another country for a specific reason, in this case it's for health, be aware that probably you need to protect these families to travel to another country, because as I said, probably the mom needs to resignate to have a work. There is a big impact that nobody is going to pay the cost, and the cost is paid by patients and families. I think that for the reason I said that my dream is to have a regulation that at the end will have some consequences probably at national level to protect and make more possible thinking in the patient from an holistic perspective, not only as a person living with a disease.
Everything that we're doing in these indications and TAs is for the patients, and that speaks to really the purpose of this discussion, the purpose of what we're encouraging, and again, as a global project to benefit these patients. Well, Begonya, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. We want to thank the audience for your attention and for the questions and the interactions. Just as a reminder, this has been recorded, so the replay will be available. Also the publication that Begonya had mentioned earlier. And we also welcome any questions or comments after the webinar. Please feel free to communicate with us. We'll make sure that we let you know how to do that. And again, want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar, a truly important topic, and we thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.